The FDA just approved a brand new drug to treat Alzheimer's disease. Does this give hope to a field and to patients who have been struggling and desperate for hope from a medical community that has really failed to present any viable options? Or at $56,000 a year, is this a very expensive misstep from the FDA that might give false hope, but no real clinical benefit? I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at DietDoctor.com, and the bigger question is also, where does this leave us in the discussion of drugs versus lifestyle, expensive versus inexpensive when it comes to preventing and treating Alzheimer's disease? And unfortunately, those questions I posed in the beginning, I feel this is the latter, that it was an expensive misstep. But let's talk about the specifics and see what you think and see if we can draw any potential conclusions. So the drug is aducanumab, and it's made from Biogen. So it's a monoclonal antibody, which is a type of drug that has had pretty big success in a lot of different fields, from autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and psoriasis to even cancer treatment. So these monoclonal antibodies, there's a lot of excitement about them. And what this one is, it specifically targets the amyloid plaque in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. So people who have Alzheimer's disease, they're much more likely to have these plaques in their brain called amyloid plaques. But here's the interesting thing. So these monoclonal antibodies target those plaques and can remove them. But there isn't any proof or consensus that the amyloid is the cause of Alzheimer's disease. There's a question of if it could be a response to Alzheimer's disease, right? The fire versus the fireman analogy. So that's what I find so interesting. There's a lot of enthusiasm because this drug can remove those plaques, but what do we know that does to people with Alzheimer's disease? Does it completely remove the disease? Well, no, we don't have that evidence. And look, Alzheimer's disease is a terrible disease, not just for the patient. It's obviously terrible for the patient, but for the caregivers, the loved ones, the cost to society, the missed work for people who have to take care of people with Alzheimer's disease, the institutional cost. I mean, it's enormous. And unfortunately, the prevalence of Alzheimer's disease is only going one direction, and that's up as the population ages. And likely our lack of metabolic health has a lot to do with it as well. So people are desperate. The world is desperate for treatments of Alzheimer's disease. And in the United States, we haven't had a drug approved by the FDA for over 20 years. There have been billions of dollars put into research for Alzheimer's disease drugs, and they've all failed. So I understand sort of this desperation to find something. But here's the thing with aducanumab, that it was initially studied showing that it can remove the plaque, but the clinical outcomes were null. They actually stopped the trials back in 2019 for clinical futility because it wasn't showing a statistically significant benefit in how the patients were doing. So they had mild cognitive impairment. They weren't advanced Alzheimer's disease. They had mild cognitive impairment, but throughout the course of these trials, there was no clinical benefit. Well, that seems like an open and shut case. Well, then they went back, I don't know, a year later, 9 months later, and they reevaluated the data, looking only at the group that got the highest dose of the drug. And in one trial, not in all trials, right? In only one trial, they did see a slight 22% relative risk reduction, right? Not an absolute risk reduction of 22%, but a relative risk reduction of 22% in their symptoms. So with that data, they then came to the FDA. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. The FDA advisory board unanimously said, do not approve this drug. There's no good evidence of clinical improvement. Do not approve this drug. So what did the FDA do? They approved the drug. And as a result, 3 people on the advisory committee quit. They said, I give up. If you're not going to listen to a unanimous vote, what are we doing here? And that seems pretty reasonable. So it really forces us to ask, why would the FDA approve this drug? And for me, it comes down to just desperation, that patients are desperate and they sense the desperation that we haven't had a new drug in so long. But the drug costs $56,000 per year. You have to go in every month for an IV infusion, and you need to get serial brain MRIs because one of the side effects of the drug is it can cause small brain bleeds or fluid accumulation in the brain. So although the safety profile, they say overall, was pretty good, I mean, that's still pretty concerning that you need these MRIs, which adds to the cost, adds to the inconvenience, and adds to the risk that you could have blood in the brain. Now, to their credit, they're saying they could withdraw this approval and that Biogen needs to collect data here ongoing that it is effective. But essentially what they did was they shifted the cost of acquiring that data from the company to the United States, to the taxpayers, to Medicare. We are now all paying for Biogen to get their data, which is sort of a skeptical way to look at it, but I think true. It's kind of hard to argue with that. Normally, a company would have to prove significant benefit before getting approval. But now they got approval before significant benefit and said, okay, but let's collect this data and show benefit down the road. Now, why am I going through all this? Well, one, I mean, as a doctor, this puts tremendous pressure on doctors because now patients are going to say, I heard this new drug is approved, give it to me, give it to my family, my loved one who has Alzheimer's disease, whatever the case may be, because we're desperate for something. And that's just going to crank up the costs and put the pressure on the doctor. How could the doctor say no to that? It's going to be very difficult. But here's where I really struggle. Now, at $56,000 a year, there is tremendous incentive for these companies now to crank out these drugs and for new companies to look for new drugs, which could be a good thing, but as long as they actually show benefit and not drugs that just remove the plaque without any clinical benefit. But we also have some data showing that nutrition and lifestyle can play a big part and significantly impact Alzheimer's disease. And one of those is a ketogenic diet. And we have a guide and actually a couple articles on our website specifically about the evidence supporting a ketogenic diet as its role for preventing and treating Alzheimer's disease. And of course, Amy Berger's written a book about this. Dr. Dale Bredesen's written a book about this. And it's phenomenal information. But it brings up this sort of juxtaposition, this battle between expensive drugs that people get excited about and can spend billions of dollars on versus less exciting and also very much less expensive lifestyle interventions that have data to support that they work. But where are the billions of dollars or even millions of dollars to support research in this area? And that's what I really want to bring up. And I don't have an answer on how to change this other than to bring it up and get people talking about it, get you talking about it, get scientists talking about it, get doctors talking about it, and hopefully get the people in the FDA realizing that what we don't need are really expensive medications that probably don't work. But what we do need is more emphasis on less expensive interventions that might just work. Lifestyle interventions, whether that's ketone supplements, ketogenic diets, MCT oils. There was a review that reviewed all those interventions and it showed promise. It showed clinical benefit. Now, it was small clinical benefit. They were small trials, but they also cost next to nothing compared to what these drugs cost. So it's sort of a long-winded way of saying, look, we need to be careful about where we're putting our priorities and our emphasis. And I think we really, as a medical community, as a world, we need to focus more on lifestyle as an intervention and a treatment. And I think the FDA really sort of tripped on this and made a mistake. And I'm really concerned about what the downstream outcome is going to be, the pressure on the doctors, the probable false hope for patients, and the cost to society. I hope the drug turns out to be better than the evidence says it is, but I'm very skeptical. But what I do know is that nutrition and ketogenic diets can play a significant role, and I think that's where we should be focusing. And at Diet Doctor, we want to bring that to the attention to as many people as we can for free. I mean, this doesn't cost you anything to read about it, learn about it, and try it in yourself or your loved one if you think it might have a role in helping them. And then you can monitor their symptoms and see how they go. Of course, if you're using it to treat a condition, check with your doctor. And if your doctor is at all skeptical about it or unsure about it, send them to our website. We'll link to the article, the main article below. Send them to our website. We want to educate them about the potential for this because, again, it's easy, it's cheap, and it's potentially effective. So I hope that makes sense. And if you thought this was helpful, please click the thumbs up and the subscribe button below. Leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And join us here in the future for more updates on Diet Doctor News on YouTube.